CCI. Join us for a series of workshops this spring tailored to you. What matters to you? Starting this Thursday, March 5th, yesterday, at 7 in Axon 103, we will offer you a series of skill-building workshops that help you focus on how to find meaning and purpose during your time here at Middlebury, and help you to scaffold the huge question of what impact do I want to have on the world. Designed with first years and sophomores in mind, workshops will run from March 5th to April 30th. Take a study break, mark your calendars, and join us for all 5 workshops. All sessions will take place in Axon 103, and there are more details for individual sessions, such as know what you've got, know what you need, develop the gifts to surround yourself with people whose gifts complement your own. That's this week. The following week, tell your story with the Oratory Society. It's easy to get stuck in the same scripted response to, what do you want to do when you leave Middlebury? Explore 4 different options and learn how to tell your story so the next time someone asks you what you want to do, you choose the answer that excites you most. Following one, family influences, uncover formative conscious and subconscious messages about work that you've received from family members and mentors, and understand how these messages shape the way you approach your career. Final one, April 30th, Design Thinking, Your Future. This workshop will use the principles of design thinking for mapping out intentional and measurable actions toward putting your liberal arts education to work post-Middlebury. Welcome everyone to the Center for Social Entrepreneurship Friday Speaker Series. Our speaker today is Ekow Edzie, a Middlebury alum, who works transnationally with EF on Education First, a company that some of you may have heard of or used as it runs international trips for high school students all over the world. Ekow graduated with a major in environmental studies in 2010. After graduation, he worked with a number of nonprofits in the San Francisco area before joining the Peace Corps, where he spent his time in the Dominican Republic. Upon completion of the Peace Corps, Ekow was contacted by George Stewart, his former high school Spanish teacher and a current member of the EF team. EF hired Ekow to work transnationally and help develop relationships with nonprofits in the Dominican Republic. Since reconnecting in the fall of 2013, George and Ekow have developed 9 unique nonprofit and community organization connections with schools in the U.S. to advance projects related to conservation, community development, and education. I'll now turn the floor over to Ekow. Thank you for coming today.
Hello, everybody. First, I'd like to say thank you again to Professor Aisha and Mustafa for inviting me here today. It's a really nice feeling coming back here after 4+ years. It feels like a nice home, so thank you for that. So this presentation really started earlier this year when I ran into Professor Aisha at a conference that I was not invited to. And I didn't know I was not invited to it until I arrived at the conference to sign in with my colleague and former Spanish teacher, George Stewart, and saw there were pre-printed name tags. My name was clearly not there. So that was interesting. Nonetheless, it turned out that the keynote speaker was none other than Professor Isham, and so my attempts to kind of stay under the radar were completely undermined. But I'm glad that happened because we were able to connect, and I was able to retouch on the concept of social entrepreneurship, which I was really interested in when I was at Middlebury as an undergrad. And it has started this process that's brought me here today. At that presentation, Professor Isham presented 2 key aspects of social entrepreneurship. He mentioned that social entrepreneurship, in essence, is investment in key people or organizations for maximum output and social good. And he also presented on the importance of empathy, of being able to have cross-cultural understanding. The work that I've been doing for the last few years, working with EF Education First to establish partnerships with various nonprofits in the DR, has definitely been promoting these aims. Here we can see a photo of a number of Dominican youth standing up in their white t-shirts. They are members of the Green Brigade. or the Brigada Verde, which is an initiative that's been functioning in the DR for a little more than 10 years, with the central aims of promoting leadership amongst youth and environmental conservation. We're able to support their work by connecting with student groups, and with each student group we also have a small budget which goes to their projects. Sitting down on the bench here, we see a few middle school students actually. And here they're having the opportunity to learn a little bit about the lives of similar youth in a very different cultural context. I would say these are both key groups as far as having a large social impact where they are. Because the folks that are standing up, they're already organized and focused on promoting leadership amongst youth and environmental conservation. And the folks that are sitting down have the fortune of being students in the U.S. education system, so they have access to lots of resources. And our hope is that after this experience, when they go home, back to the U.S., they're going to be committed to being better citizens in the U.S. and better citizens of the world. That being said, my presentation today is not going to focus on an analysis of the impact that these two different groups can have, but instead it's going to be a focus on the path that has allowed this type of collaboration to happen. So first I'd like to define the entities, okay? So here we have EF Education First, which is the largest private education company in the world. As you can see here, a number of very impressive stats. An interesting thing is EF recently celebrated their 50th anniversary with none other than Bill Clinton there to speak. And here we have the Union of Neighbors group of La Jagua. So La Jagua is a community in Barbacoa, which is in the central mountain range of the Dominican Republic. It's the community closest to where I was living when I was in the Peace Corps in the DR. It's a little bit fuzzy, but there actually is a man on the right here. His name is Kachan, who is a very well-known local figure. He has lots of political aspirations, and here he's kind of preaching his sermon, for lack of a better term. In this organization, they hope to provide more opportunities for youth in the area. One long-term goal would be potentially to have a recreational facility, if you could do practice sports and things of that sort. And as of the spring of 2014, EF Education First and the Junta de Vecinos of La Jagua have been working together to do solid waste management workshops. They've been advancing the goals of this organization, and they've been allowing high school and university and even middle school students to come to the DR and learn about other modes of life and learn about community development. So, I'd like to provide you guys a photo so that you can have a face in mind as we discuss these two entities and how they came together. On the left, we actually have a photo of George Stewart, who is a man that Professor Eide mentioned earlier, who actually was my former Spanish teacher in high school and is currently the Director of Curriculum and Program Development at EF Education First. And on the right, we have Mr. Alex Corona, who is the administrator of the national park called Armando Bermudez, which actually has the largest mountain in the Caribbean, called Pico Duarte. It's a 10,000 plus foot peak. And here's their first look at each other. And I like this photo because, to me, it shows they're trying to understand each other. And I would say that in establishing this collaboration between two very distinct entities, that is the first step. Trying to understand each other and getting to a place of being able to see eye to eye. But if we want to tell the full story of this collaboration, we would actually have to go back about 6 years. So, 6 years ago, Jaime David Mirabal was appointed as the new Minister of Environment of the Dominican Republic. Jaime David is one of the few surviving relatives of the Mirabal sisters. Is anyone here familiar with the Mirabal sisters? You are? Can you explain a little bit about the...
Not very familiar. I just read the
Time of Butterflies?
June Diaz. And so were they like martyrs in a sense against the Trujillo
Trujillo, yeah.
regime?
Yeah.
They
Essentially, yeah, the meteorol stitches were heroines that played an enormous role in the downfall of the Trujillo dictatorship. And Jaime David is the son of one of the Middlebury sisters, and he has been a very active political figure in the DR for a number of years. A real mover and shaker. And he was appointed as the Minister of Environment, and he decided that he wanted to change a little bit the management of what was then the Dominican Republic's National Forestry School, which actually you can see a photo here of. And so to change things up at the National Forestry School, he instated this woman named Martha Fernandez, who I believe actually is a distant relative of his, and he provided her with very specific instructions. He wanted her to change the National Forestry School into the National Environmental School, which had some very specific caveats to it, namely broadening up the curriculum to include the other aspects of work in modern environmental work. Another major caveat was helping the National Forestry School develop more substantial connections with the community around it to launch an ecotourism project with a large waterfall in the area, which was a very politically charged situation because the infrastructure for access to the waterfall was built by a local, basically mogul. He was a major entrepreneur in the area. He owns the local television company, a number of other things. And after this local entrepreneur had invested in this waterfall attraction, the area was declared a national park. So Jaime David wanted that funding to go into the government for the conservation of the area and not into the pockets of this one guy, as it had been going for 30 plus years. So these were all parts of the rationale for Jaime David to instate Martha Fernandez into the forestry school. So, to achieve these aims, Martha Fernandez went into a large project of recruiting new professors, and she wanted to bring in more resources to be able to specifically tackle this project with ecotourism in the community. So she sent in a solicitation to the Peace Corps in what would have been early spring of 2011. And at the same time, I was driving into the DR for my training with the Peace Corps. And then in the spring of 2011, I was sent for my assignment, which was to go to Harbacoa to work at the National Forestry School, help them arrive and become the National Environmental School, and work on an ecotourism project to promote access to this waterfall and improve conservation as part of that access.
So can I just interrupt, because I did Peace Corps? I can't imagine better than son.
Yeah.
This is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very, and I would, if anyone wants to learn more about Peace Corps in general in that process, I'd be more than happy to talk about that after this presentation, because I had a wonderful experience and I would really recommend it to anybody. So anyway, so here I am. I had a fantastic experience in the Peace Corps, working with the environmental school, designing curriculum, trying to develop ways for my students to have more field experience and things of that sort, and trying to troubleshoot this relatively sophisticated project, working with the government and ecotourism and this local community organization. And about a year and a half into my service, I was contacted by that fellow that I showed in the previous photo that was eyeing down the Castro-looking character, George Stewart, who was my Spanish teacher and my soccer coach. And he just wanted to check in on me, see how things were going, and I think he also remembered in a previous email that I was leaving the DR, and he wanted to brainstorm. Because he knew that the company, EF Education First, was interested in building an operation in the DR, and he wanted to pick my brain a little bit. And he said, well, Ekow, what do you think about this concept of establishing a relationship so we can have interchange between students in the US and the school where you're working in the DR? And I was like, well, it could be interesting, but let me sit down and connect with the other teachers at school. So we did just that. We sat down and we talked, and after our conversation, for a number of reasons, it seemed to make sense. One of the principal reasons being that the school, the former National Forestry School, current environmental school, is 100% funded by the government. And the funding is intermittent, inconsistent, and undependable, which is particularly troubling given the essential mission of the environmental school, which is essentially to provide vocational training for the future environmental managers of the DR. Here you can see some students in environmental school actually checking out a research project of a PhD student from Cornell who's studying an endemic woodpecker species in the local mountains here. Here are students in a field trip, and here are students doing a study of the recuperation of an endemic pine tree species in the Central Mountain Range. The point being, for the school to meet its mission, it needs a little bit of funding to be able to do these field studies. It's a little bit different than just working in the classroom. You need to be able to have often food to go on the road, gas money, you need to have tools, things of that sort. And that was a major issue. In the past, funding had been so tight that students had to go back home because all the students were there in full scholarships, which is an important piece. So that was one major pro of establishing this collaboration, having new and more sources of independent funding. Another major benefit was the fact the school was in this transition process, right? Going from just a forestry school to an environmental school. Part of that transition involved opening up classes more of the humanities, placing more priority on reading and writing skills. And the hope and the thought was that contact with more teachers, more educators from other contexts could aid in that process. Another third and very specific pro to this collaboration was that the Minister of Environment also declared that all the students at the environmental school should have basic working knowledge of English, which is, a no-brainer why that would be a positive collaboration. So there was interest. At the same time, my colleagues in Boston understand there was a major interest in the U.S. education system for these kind of experiences. Global citizenship was becoming a major topic. Many districts were requiring community service to graduate from high school, both public and private schools. And a number of schools were actually hiring on staff to specifically integrate service learning and project-based learning as part of school's curriculum. And at the same time that the interest was growing in this topic, people were learning more about it and starting to understand that it's actually pretty challenging. It's pretty challenging to connect students with meaningful project work with real educational outcomes, especially when your interest is to provide cultural learning as part of that process and talking about travel. Here we have a picture of a project teacher taking a photo of his student presenting at a conference run by a national initiative to promote sexual health in the Dominican Republic. And here we have a photo of a little boy talking to his brother about how this guy over here with the Brave shirt just paid $5 for a soda and how it's like 200 pesos and he can't believe it. So, the point being, there was an opportunity. But just because there was an opportunity was not enough to ensure that EF was going to make this investment in building this operation. What do you guys think was another factor that had to be a part of the picture to establish this investment or to make this idea interesting on a business level? We have opportunity, we have interest. What else might be missing potentially? Profitability. And for this company, what that really means is scalability, right? If we're talking about student travel in particular, you can maybe have 100 students in the same day travel through Paris. There's a number of museums, a number of sites to see, but you cannot have 100 students on the same day work on an initiative in a local school, right? That would be pandemonium. So what that meant was we had to find a number of host organizations that were interested in this concept. And it turns out that there were, and that there are. Here we see a photo of Grifo. I apologize if the photo is a little bit dark. He currently is showing one of our EF guys and Peace Corps volunteer that work with them the intake site to an aqueduct and a small-scale hydroelectric system. He works with a community organization that was the first community organization in the DR to receive funding from the UNDP to build a small-scale hydroelectric system. And now all community organizations in the DR that receive funding to build small-scale hydroelectric are sent to this community to learn about the process. And it's really inspiring and really wonderful. Our students, when they're sent to this site, do the same hike that these folks had to do with mules and donkeys to carry these huge PVC pipes up the mountainside, what has now provided them with 24-hour electricity, which is a huge deal. Even in the capital city of the DR, do you very rarely find 24-hour electricity. These guys have that. So it's great. We're opening students' eyes to what electrification really means. And we're also providing funding for Grifo to be able to do his daily rounds to the community and make sure that everything is up to par to maintain the system here. And Grifo's community organization is one of many that was interested in this concept. For a number of the nonprofits that we connected with, connecting with U.S. schools was actually part of their essential mission for maintaining a certain level of financial sustainability. So it was scalable. Here we have a photo of a different member of the community organization. This is William. He is with some students from Boston Green Academy doing an analysis of the local watershed. It's great. The students are learning about really practical applications and strategies for watershed management. And William is getting the opportunity to enact his projects. Okay. Well, this will work. We have a little video here. This is a video to illustrate visually the nature of some of our clear challenges. If we can see here, the students are in dance class. Woman Blue is teaching the dance class. Now, they're doing the same steps, but the effect is clearly different. And I just want to point out that that is one of the essential challenges in the work of making the connection between a large multinational corporation and some of these small organizations. They're trying to take the same steps, they have the same interests, but the effect is just a little bit different, largely because of the different cultural contexts, right? So we have an opportunity. The opportunity is profitable because for us it's scalable, right? But we also have very clear challenges. One of those challenges is a cultural challenge, right? In the DR, especially in many of the rural areas where we work, there is a culture of favors. People are very, very happy to do things for you because, they should, because you're friends, you established a relationship with them. But naturally for a corporation, it's more of a culture of contracts. And that has been challenging, trying to mediate communication and procuration of services when for some folks it has to be written down and for other folks it's just assumed. Another clear challenge is that the learning objectives of schools and the specific development objectives of organizations don't always line up. They very rarely do. So how do we, as the service provider, rectify that? Well, we had to change some things around. We had to adapt, essentially. Instead of a school, for example, signing up to do a tour of London, Paris, and Rome, and signing up to specifically visit this museum at this time and that restaurant at that time, we have some themes, which essentially allows me flexibility to connect with local organizations and see what types of projects are appropriate at the time, and we allow the local organization, as we should, to define the specific activities. So here we have an example of an improved cook stove, which is a project that's also promoted by the same organization that's doing the small-scale hydroelectric system. It's a great project. It reduces deforestation because here in this space, the sticks are inserted and the efficiency of the burning is increased exponentially. And the clay piece in the back of the structure, you can see, is actually the ends of a chimney, which gets the smoke out of the home, which greatly reduces upper respiratory infections, mostly for women who spend many hours a day in these small wooden cooking areas. And it's also a business development project because to do this project, you have to work with the trained basis. So every time we build one of these stoves, we'll also contribute to the local economy. So, say for instance, your group, when you sign up for the environment theme, you very likely could be set up to be working on this project, which is very specifically satisfying the goals of a partner organization. But, and this is a very particular case, maybe you also are very interested in public health, right? Just because you're interested in public health does not necessarily mean that when you travel, and your only available times for traveling in early March, there's going to be the available time or opportunity for you to work in that. But what we can guarantee is the time for you to learn about that. Does that make sense? So here we have a picture of Sensa, who's one of the leaders of this community organization, talking about her work in a local community health network. She has some pictures in a book which she uses to work with local mothers to talk about maternal health. It was a great experience this group had. They advanced the initiatives of this organization on the priorities they had in this time, and they also were able to satisfy their learning objective of learning a little bit about public health while they're in the DR. So, to kind of summarize that little piece, having a system of themes which allows us more flexibility, but also structured learning time to hash out teachers' different learning objectives. And in the end, despite having this system to deal with the challenges, I want to point out the fact that it's still not perfect. There are a number of challenges, but it's real and it's functional. And realizing what that means for me has been a really great education. And there also have been a number of great other positive impacts. For example, we've been funding local humanitarian organizations, obviously, hopefully opening students' eyes to other opportunities in life and to specific strategies for development. Job creation. In the DR, we employ a number of local field directors that manage the experience for all the students that come down here. And I'm very happy to say that who was my Peace Corps project partner and is now one of our best performing field directors is very well poised to take my job when I transition to leading the DR, which I'm really excited about in the future. A general positive impact from the local economy, right? Working with local hotels, local restaurants, things of that sort. And creating new space for opportunity and novel teaching methods. What I mean by new space for opportunity is that when you're working with a community organization, they might never have really considered what it means to work with a resource that is a group of students, right? Typically, it's very challenging, to be perfectly honest, when you're working with a group of middle school or high school students who don't necessarily have language skills or technical skills. But there are times when that resource is actually great and very useful. In particular, if you're interested in doing any type of English language learning or any type of cultural learning in general. And when I say novel teaching methods, we mean encouraging teachers to be a little bit more flexible with their methodology for delivering their learning objectives. And I'd say that my overall experience working to establish this type of collaboration has shown me, if nothing else, the value of really getting to know a place and listening in a general sense. I think that as a person who's had the opportunity to go to college and to study, it's really easy to assume that all things of value have to come from inside your mind and then go outwards. That all things of value are basically your own ingenuity. But my experience has been a real testament to taking a little bit of a backseat and looking around what's going on outside first. Thank you. Any questions?
So is EF hoping to create similar programs, like sort of experiential education programs, service learning trips like this in other places, or is the DR sort of the pilot?
So the DR was sort of the pilot, but EF actively is working on developing programs in other countries and has programs now in Peru, Ecuador, and a number of other countries as well.
So something I don't know, people often talk about when talking about some like things that are international or national funding is the sustainability of that. Could you speak to that a little bit about like, is this a sustainable model to have these trips sort of funding that it specifically stood out to me when you're talking about their funding of the environmental school? Is this sustainable or are there other plans?
I would say, sustainability is a big topic. So would you hash out a little more what you mean by that?
I mean, like, the model of, it seems like sort of the schools, the student groups in the U.S. are learning and in exchange sort of, there's learning on both sides, but the school, the environment, at least that one, is sort of depending on them for funding as well. Do you see this as like a good dependency of that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think, I mean, good and bad.
Not quite that clear.
Right, now, I see what you're saying. To answer it in the first place, I would say that, yes, I mean, the way that we build the budgeting for all of our project sites is that there is the funding for the continued work of our partner organization in that site in the future. For a number of the organizations that we work with in 2014, we were one of the principal funders, and for at least one of them, we were the principal funder for them in 2014 to maintain their operations. And so that often means being able to hire on new staff, start new programming, start new initiatives, and things of that sort. But again, it's not perfect, and something I've been learning a lot about is, especially when you're working in development, and I think it may not be that different from working as a professor in college. When you're looking for resources, often the resources have criteria. You know, say you're really hoping to do a conservation project that focuses on species biodiversity conservation, for example, but the only grants that are available in that season are focused on climate change. You know, if you're agile, you might try to change your grant focus a little bit so you can get access to that funding because that's what's available. And in lots of, at least in the DR, there are not that many resources available for development work, so typically organizations are in a place where they have to be a bit flexible, no matter where the source of funding is coming from.
So I went on a community service cultural experience trip the summer after my freshman year, and then after that my high school started to incorporate this program called Build On.
Okay.
And so my experience was, although I felt useful in some ways,
Yeah.
and I certainly learned a lot in Panama about the culture and had great experiences, I felt like if I was to look at it very pragmatically, the money that it costs to send all these kids down there and then kind of slightly aid the program,
Mhm.
slightly aid the real work, where the workers who were working alongside us really had the general gist quite well organized and they knew exactly what was going on. I feel like, how do you balance this cost of everybody going, would it be better just to send
Yeah.
money there? And then also I was wondering if there is ever a component where potentially the kids in this case who are involved in DR, say, have the chance to maybe go back to the United States as like an exchange program.
Let me answer the question,
Yeah.
Becky. First off, you're 100% right. We work with a community organization in the northwest of the country that specifically does English as a foreign language training. And the best case scenario for them would to have Oxford-trained English teachers at their behest to teach English every week of the year. The reality is that doesn't exist, right? And all of the sites, having, you know, an expert in your field with that funding would be the best case, but often it's just not there. So what we have is something that's real. There's real demand for it, and it works. And yeah, people are happy with the collaboration thus far. And I'd say, as far as the second question, there is not the exact same model available for Dominicans coming to the U.S., but EF does offer a number of programs for folks to travel to the U.S. from other countries. It's not a specific service-focused program. Yeah, you're welcome.
I was wondering more about the DR School of the Environment, and you said that all the students there are on full scholarship,
Yeah.
and so I'm just like, anything else you could say about that, but particularly the students and who it attracts and what they go on to do?
That's a really great question, I mean, and I really love that school. That's where I spent, my 2+ years in Peace Corps. So in the mid-late 60s, when the DR was first trying to promote reforestation in a general sense, there was a realization that there were very few Dominican trained foresters, so they needed to train foresters. And so the school started specifically to be able to fuel those initiatives. And what that has meant is that students come from all around the DR. They apply for these scholarships. The scholarship testing is facilitated by local branches of the Ministry of Environment. After they pass these tests, if that went well, they're invited to campus to do sort of a live-in trial situation. And if that goes well, they have one final test, and then usually from an application pool of about 1,000 students, we get down to our final class of about 50 students. Yeah, and it's a really great program. And as I said, they're from all walks of life. There's a few students from Haiti that are given scholarships by the Dominican government as well. Yeah, they're there for 2.5 years or so. The essential purpose, as I explained before, was for those Dominicans to go on to work with the Dominican government in conservation initiatives. Some of them do that, and they get contracts right out of the bat after finishing their tenure at the environmental school. Some of them decide they want to go on and pursue a 4-year degree in the DR or otherwise. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great program.
How many years is it?
It's turns out to be about 2.5. Yeah. When they first arrive, there's what they call like a 5-month leveling period. Unfortunately, the Dominican's education system is very poor. It's one of the most poor performing education systems in Latin America. So, we have many students that arrive that have lots of practical knowledge of plant species and things of that sort, but can really just barely put together a sentence in Spanish. So there's this long period of trying to get everyone up to a basic level. And from there, we'll go.
It seems like there's a lot going on in this organization. I was wondering what your specific role is with your job.
Well, I wear many hats, I would say. But my principal responsibility is connecting with and form relationships with organizations in the DR, right? So when the company was first getting started, the students were traveling to the school where I worked in Peace Corps. And from there, we kind of went out exploring other options. And then once we established a collaboration with an organization, then from there, I spent a lot of time working with the organization to define what types of activities are appropriate for working with students. They have to be safe, obviously. They have to be locally driven activities. They have to have expert guidance. And for us, that means both in the implementation of the project, but also be able to hash out the kind of big picture context of that project. And they have to have larger educational potential, right? Like perhaps, for example, for a community organization, the priority in a week is paving the road. We're probably not going to work on that because, as I explained previously, we try to satisfy objectives from 2 different entities, and learning is one of them for schools, obviously. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you find that, I imagine one of the organizations you're working with might have a longer term project and you're sending students for a week or
Yeah.
two. Do you find that like that lack of continuity is a problem, or does that work with your organization? Like
For
different
longer
groups-
term projects,
Yeah,
Well-
different groups coming and going.
rarely are we the driving force behind a project. And hopefully we're not.
Yeah.
The idea is that we're not.
Mm-hmm.
So we're adding value to a project, we're contributing resources and time to that project. And so in the off-season, when we're not there, the organization is still working on those projects. And the idea is that also each group that comes in is leaving behind funding for the continuing work on those projects. And also, EF is well saturated in the U.S. education system. So if you were coming from a school in Boston, did your service experience, will very likely be able to connect with another school in Texas, which is also interested in going out there, and they follow up on the work that you did as well, maybe the month following that. Yeah.
What's next for you?
Oh, what's next for me? We shall see. In the next few years, graduate school,
Yeah.
for sure, programs, interested in that, so, yeah.
But you've learned so much on the ground,
Yeah.
like you could get frustrated at a master's program in international development or something
I
like
know.
that, right? So that's the trick, to find one that pushes you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is the trick. So we'll see. Any advice, I'm sure to take.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And then, this is great stuff, and I think you're in the sort of demographic that we love bringing back, well, because you're 5 years out, and
Mhm.
super helpful to folks who are beginning to think about what comes next. Just on like those first few steps out of undergrad, talk to us about that, and
Okay.
what that feels like, and like kind
Sure.
of almost like random decisions you begin to make.
Yeah. Well, I knew that I wanted to work abroad as I was graduating because I didn't have the opportunity to study abroad because I was very back and forth in my studies, going from environmental studies to theater and biology, mixing around, so it just wasn't going to work out. And so I had Peace Corps in my mind a little bit. But that was a little ways off because the application process is very long and belabored. So I was applying for, tons and tons of internships and jobs. I mean, at one point I flew down to Chicago to interview for some position to teach in Japan because I studied Japanese for a little bit. I was applying for gigs with the EPA and lots of other things. And I ended up doing a hodgepodge of internships in San Francisco. So I was working with this, I got a gig working with this theater company called Antenna Theater, which actually just focused in environmental activism, which seems bizarre, but assuming those worlds don't really cross over, but it turns out they do. I found that internship on the Middlebury Career Network service, so it's a little plug for that. That worked out for me. I was like, I actually do theater and environmental stuff, so. I went out there to San Francisco after a road trip across the country with my buddies, and that was great. And that internship provided me with housing, but it didn't provide me with any kind of funding to sustain myself, food or whatever. So I looked around for other jobs. I got a job as a swim teacher, so I would like across the Golden Gate Bridge every night and teach the kids how to swim. And then I was like, I want to be more involved. So I was working with an organization called 826 Valencia in San Francisco. There's like educational outreach for kids of immigrants in San Francisco. And that didn't pay, but it was so exciting and fun, so I wanted to do that anyway. So I was biking across San Francisco, teaching swim class, coming back across the bridge, and doing all these things, and then trying to be like, where am I going to fall? What do I do? And all the while, I was doing my Peace Corps application process. And then, about 8 months after I graduated, I got my letter. It's like, all right, pack up, in a month, you're heading out. Yeah. So it was a real whirlwind. It was a great experiences, that's for sure. I think, especially after coming out of this really intense environment in Middlebury, when you go out into the vacuum of just life, it can be a little overwhelming. I think that's why I end up, frantically looking for opportunities to put myself to this and that and whatever. And yeah, that's why, and I'm very happy that I went with the Peace Corps as an option. Because I think for me, I just wasn't ready to end the life of a real challenge, if that makes sense, Because I was working in San Francisco with some really interesting, conceptually interesting organizations, but the actual work that I could do was, for me, not that satisfying day to day, kind of like glorified secretary work, essentially. But, I mean, with my work with the Peace Corps, it was great training, and very much up to me what I can make it become, right? I'm sure John can testify to this as well. That process starts with, either you receive a project assignment before you can actually do any work, if you do a 3-month community diagnostic to learn about the community we're serving, do 100 interviews, do community mapping, lots of other things. So you're really able to put your wit and physicality and your tenacity to the challenge. And see, in some ways, sort of see what this major 4-year investment in yourself is worth. That's kind of what I took out of that, So if I had any advice, I'd definitely try to put yourself in a place where you can really challenge yourself. I remember, I'll take a 2-hour topic, but my senior year, I took this great class called Farm Stories with Professor John Elder. And in that class, we went out and we interviewed lots of different farms around Vermont. And we're connecting with this young couple that managed Blue Ledge Farm, and which is now a great success. And I remember one specific day I went out there and I was interviewing them. And they were talking about when they first started working on the farm, the first 8 years, putting in like 12-hour days, and the exhaustion that accompanied that. But they were just so happy to have done that. They said, when you're young, you have the energy.